The TikTok video started as a cruel joke, teenagers mocking a homeless man outside a Starbucks on Fifth Avenue. But when it went viral for all the wrong reasons, someone who recognized him from 50 years ago came forward with a story that changed everything. Welcome to the Untold Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of mockery, recognition, and redemption, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who were never meant to be forgotten. The corner of Fifth Avenue and Broadway had seen better days. Once the beating heart of downtown Manhattan, now it was just another intersection where people hurried past, eyes glued to their phones, avoiding eye contact with anything that might slow them down. The Starbucks on the corner still drew its crowd, mostly Columbia University students, young Wall Street professionals, and anyone else who could afford a $6 coffee in a city that had forgotten how to take care of its own. He sat there every morning, same spot, same time. Back against the brick wall, worn Yankees cap pulled low over weathered features. His name was Eddie, though most people never bothered to ask. To them, he was just part of the street furniture, something to step around, something to ignore, something that made them uncomfortable enough to look away and keep walking. Eddie Thompson was 73 years old, though the streets had aged him beyond his years. His jacket was military surplus, faded green with patches that had seen better decades. His boots were scuffed but still solid, the kind that were built to last through rice paddies and jungle paths. Everything about him suggested a man who had once stood straight, walked with purpose, commanded respect. But those days felt like a lifetime ago, buried under years of silence and the weight of memories he couldn't outrun. The college kids were the worst, not because they were cruel by nature, but because they were young enough to think homelessness was a choice, and privileged enough to think their opinions mattered. They'd walk past him in clusters, making jokes just loud enough for him to hear, filming everything for their TikTok accounts because nothing was real unless it was recorded and shared. That Tuesday morning in October started like any other. Eddie sat in his usual spot, watching the city wake up around him. He'd been awake since 4. Military habits die hard even after all these years, and he'd already made his rounds through the dumpsters behind the delis, looking for breakfast. He wasn't proud of it, but pride was a luxury he'd given up long ago. The coffee shop was busy, morning rush in full swing. Business professionals grabbed their drinks and disappeared into yellow cabs. Students slouched past with MacBooks bigger than they were, complaining about midterms and professors and parents who didn't understand their generation. None of them looked at Eddie. That was fine by him. He'd learned to be invisible. Around 9:30, when the morning crowd had thinned and the Columbia kids were arriving for their late morning caffeine fix, the filming started. 3 of them, 2 boys and a girl, all looking like they'd never missed a meal or slept on concrete. The girl held up her iPhone 14, switching to video mode, while the boys positioned themselves for maximum comedic effect. "Oh my God, you guys," she said in that particular tone that Gen Z uses when they think they're being edgy. "Look at this guy. He's literally been sitting here for months. Should we ask him for life advice?" She giggled, the sound sharp and cutting in the Manhattan morning air. One of the boys, tall with Air Jordans that cost more than most people made in a week, stepped closer to Eddie. "Hey, old man," he called out, loud enough for the phone to pick up clearly. "What's your secret to success? Living the American dream out here on the streets?" Eddie didn't look up. He'd learned long ago that engaging only made it worse. These kids would get their content, post it for their followers, and move on to the next source of entertainment. He just had to wait it out. But they weren't done. The second boy, shorter but with the kind of confidence that comes from growing up on the Upper East Side, knelt down beside Eddie with exaggerated concern. "Seriously, though, what happened to you, man? What choices did you make to end up here? This could be a really good case study for our sociology class." The girl kept filming, zooming in on Eddie's face, capturing every detail of his weathered features. "This is perfect," she whispered to her friends. "Professor Martinez said we needed content that shows real social issues. This is so authentic." Eddie finally looked up. His eyes were gray-blue, the color of storm clouds over the Hudson River, and they held something that should have made the kids step back. But they were too busy performing for the camera to notice. "Come on, talk to us," the tall boy pressed. "What's your story? Drugs? Alcohol? Just bad luck?" He laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "Or maybe you're one of those guys who just gave up, right? Decided it was easier to live off other people's charity than actually work for a living?" That's when Eddie spoke. His voice was quiet, rough from years of not using it much, but it carried a weight that cut through their laughter like a blade through silk. "I work every day," he said simply. "Just not the kind of work you'd understand." The girl nearly dropped her phone in excitement. "Oh my God, he's talking. This is going to get so many views." She moved closer, pushing the camera toward his face. "What kind of work? Like collecting cans? Is that really work?" Eddie looked at her for a long moment. Behind the cruelty, behind the thoughtless privilege, he saw something familiar. Fear. These kids were scared of becoming him, scared of losing control, scared of discovering how thin the line really was between their comfortable lives and his reality. So they mocked him to make themselves feel safe. "The kind of work that keeps people like you free to make videos like this," he said. The boys exchanged glances. This wasn't going the way they'd planned. The homeless guy was supposed to be either pathetic or angry, not calm and articulate. "What, are you saying you're like a veteran or something?" the shorter boy asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Yeah, right. Every homeless guy claims to be a veteran. It's like the ultimate sob story." Eddie reached slowly into his jacket pocket. The movement was careful, deliberate, the kind of motion that speaks of muscle memory and training that runs deeper than conscious thought. He pulled out a small, battered wallet, not the kind with credit cards and cash, but the kind that holds the only things worth keeping when everything else is gone. From the wallet, he took out a photograph, black and white, creased with age, showing a group of young men in army uniforms. They were smiling, arms slung over each other's shoulders, the kind of brotherhood that forms when men face death together and live to tell about it. "This was taken in 1971, Eddie said, pointing to a face in the center of the group. Young, confident, wearing the uniform of the United States Army. K-san. I was 22 inches. The kids leaned in despite themselves. The photograph was real. You could see it in the way the light hit the paper, in the genuine smiles of men who were still young enough to believe they were invincible. We were there for 77 days, Eddie continued, his voice taking on a rhythm that spoke of stories told in the dark, around campfires, in the safety of foxholes when the world outside was trying to kill you. Under siege. No supplies, no relief, just us and the North Vietnamese army and the knowledge that every sunrise might be our last. The girl's phone was still recording, but she'd lowered it slightly. Something in Eddie's voice had changed the energy of the moment. This wasn't the performance they'd expected. On day 63, Eddie said, we took a direct hit on our position. 122-millimeter rockets followed by ground assault. When the smoke cleared, I was the only one left standing in a crater that used to be our bunker. 6 men down, all of them hurt, some of them... He paused, looking at something far beyond the Starbucks, far beyond the present moment. Some of them hurt real bad. The street around them had grown quieter, though they didn't notice. Other people had stopped to listen, drawn by something in the old man's voice that commanded attention without demanding it. Command said it would be 6 hours before medical evacuation could reach us. 6 hours. Eddie's hand moved to his chest, where beneath the worn fabric of his shirt, old scars still ached in cold weather. I carried them out, one by one, through enemy fire, through terrain that had been turned into a moonscape by 3 months of bombardment. Took me 4 trips. The tall boy opened his mouth to say something, probably a joke, probably something to deflate the moment and return them to their comfort zone. But nothing came out. The last man I carried, Eddie continued. His name was Michael Rodriguez. Kid from Texas, maybe 19 years old. Shrapnel had opened up his leg from knee to hip. He was losing blood faster than I could stop it, and he knew it. You know what he said to me as I carried him? Eddie looked directly at the girl with the camera. He said, "Don't let them forget us." Not him. United States. The guys who didn't make it home. The guys whose stories ended in that crater. Silence stretched between them like a held breath. The city moved around them, cars passing, people walking, life continuing, but in their small circle, time had stopped. They gave me the Medal of Honor for that day, Eddie said, reaching back into his wallet. This time he pulled out something that made the kids step back as if they'd been slapped. A medal, tarnished with age but unmistakable. The highest military decoration for valor in combat. President Nixon hung it around my neck in the Rose Garden, told me I was a hero. The girl's phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering on the sidewalk. The video kept recording, but now it was pointed at the sky. But heroes don't end up on street corners, Eddie said, his voice gentle now, understanding. Heroes go home, get jobs, raise families, live normal lives. I tried that for a while. Really tried. But some experiences. He shrugged, a gesture that contained decades of pain. Some experiences change you in ways that don't fit into normal life anymore. Eddie carefully placed the medal and the photograph back in his wallet. The nightmares started about 6 months after I got home, then the flashbacks, then the drinking, because it was the only thing that made the noise in my head quiet down. Lost the job first, then the apartment, then the wife and kids. He looked at each of the kids in turn. The VA tried to help. They've got programs now, better than they used to be. But some of us fall through the cracks. Not because we're weak, not because we're lazy. Because the world we came back to didn't match the world we'd left behind, and we never quite figured out how to bridge that gap. The shorter boy was crying now, tears streaming down his face without any attempt to hide them. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. We didn't know." "You couldn't have known," Eddie said. "That's not your fault. But maybe next time, before you point that camera at someone, you might ask yourself what story they're carrying. Because everyone's got one, and most of them are heavier than you think." The girl bent down to pick up her phone. Her hands were shaking as she stopped the recording. Should I delete this? Eddie considered for a moment. "That's up to you. But if you post it, make sure you tell the whole story, not just the part that makes for good content." They stood there for another moment, the weight of the conversation settling around them like dust after an explosion. Then, one by one, the kids turned and walked away. Not laughing now, not joking, just walking, each lost in their own thoughts about what they'd just learned. Eddie watched them go, then settled back against the brick wall. The morning was getting warmer, and soon the lunch crowd would start filtering past. He'd sit here until then, maybe longer, watching the city move around him like water around a stone. He didn't expect to see them again. Kids that age, they processed experiences quickly and moved on. He'd given them something to think about, maybe even something that would change how they saw the world. That was enough. But 2 hours later, the girl came back. Alone this time, no camera, no audience. She was carrying a venti Pike Place roast and a turkey sandwich from the shop. "I wanted to give you this," she said, setting them down beside him, "and I wanted to apologize. Really apologize." Eddie nodded his thanks. "What's your name?" "Madison," she said. "Madison Parker." "Thank you, Madison. I'm Eddie." She sat down beside him, not caring about her designer jeans against the dirty sidewalk. "Can I ask you something? The video, should I post it?" Eddie sipped the coffee. It was good, better than anything he'd tasted in months. "What do you think?" "I think people need to see it," she said slowly. "Not because it's entertaining, but because it's important. Because maybe if they see it, they'll think twice before they—" She gestured vaguely, trying to find words for the cruelty they'd shown him. "Then post it," Eddie said. "But tell them about Michael Rodriguez. Tell them about the other 5 men who didn't come home from that crater. They're the real heroes." Madison nodded, pulling out her phone. But instead of recording, she opened her contacts. "I'm putting my number in here," she said, handing him the phone. "In case you ever need anything. Food, someone to talk to, help with VA stuff. I don't know much about any of this, but I can learn." Eddie looked at the phone for a moment, then carefully entered his name. He didn't have a phone of his own, hadn't for years, but there were places you could make calls when you needed to. "Thank you," he said, handing it back. "That means more than you know." Madison posted the video that night. Not the version they'd originally planned, the cruel mockery of a homeless man, but the whole conversation. She included a caption explaining what had happened, what they'd learned, and a plea for people to see the humanity in everyone they passed on the street. The video went viral, but not in the way they'd expected. Instead of likes and laughs, it generated something more powerful: conversation. Comments flooded in from veterans sharing their own stories, from people talking about relatives who'd struggled with PTSD, from individuals who admitted they'd been guilty of the same casual cruelty toward homeless people. Major news outlets picked up the story. CNN, Fox News, and NBC all ran segments on veteran homelessness. Madison found herself fielding interview requests, but she deflected them all toward veterans organizations and homeless shelters, using her sudden platform to amplify voices that needed to be heard. Eddie became something of a New York celebrity, though he wasn't entirely comfortable with the attention. People started recognizing him, stopping to talk, offering help. The Starbucks manager gave him a part-time job cleaning up in the mornings. Nothing glamorous, but steady work and steady pay. More importantly, Madison kept her word. She came by several times a week, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just sitting and listening to stories about men who'd served their country and then struggled to find their place in the world afterward. She started volunteering at the Manhattan VA Medical Center, helping veterans navigate the bureaucracy of getting services. She learned about PTSD, about the challenges of reintegration, about the 1,000 small ways that society fails the people who've served it. The 3 kids who'd started the whole thing with their cruel joke became unlikely advocates for veteran services. They organized fundraisers at Columbia, volunteered at homeless shelters in Brooklyn, and used their social media presence to educate their peers about the realities of veteran homelessness. But perhaps the most important change was in how people saw Eddie himself. No longer invisible, no longer just part of the street furniture. He became a reminder that every person has a story worth knowing, that dignity isn't determined by a dress or bank account, that heroism doesn't always look like what we expect it to look like. Eddie never moved off the streets entirely. The offer was there. Madison and several others tried to help him find permanent housing, but decades of homelessness had changed him in ways that made 4 walls feel like a prison. Instead, he found a small studio apartment in a transitional housing program for veterans in the Bronx, a place where he could have privacy when he needed it and community when he wanted it. He kept the Medal of Honor in its place of honor, not hidden in a wallet anymore, but displayed on a small shelf where visitors could see it. Not because he was proud of it. Pride was still a complicated emotion for him, but because it represented something larger than himself. It represented Michael Rodriguez and the 5 other men who died in that crater. It represented every veteran who'd served their country and then struggled to find their way home. The video stayed up, accumulating millions of views over the months that followed. In the comments section, thousands of people shared their own stories of encounters with homeless veterans, some shameful, some redemptive. The conversation that had started with cruel teenagers had grown into something national, something important. Madison graduated from Columbia and went on to study social work at New York University, specializing in veteran services. She never forgot the lesson Eddie had taught her, that every person carries a story heavier than you think, and that dignity costs nothing to give but can change everything. Eddie lived quietly, working a small job, telling his stories to anyone who wanted to listen. He never sought out attention, but he didn't hide from it either. He'd become something he'd never expected to be again, useful. His story, his presence, his willingness to be visible made a difference. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the Starbucks was slow and the city was just waking up, he'd sit in his old spot against the brick wall. Not because he had to anymore, but because it reminded him of something important, that even in the darkest places, even when the world seems determined to make you invisible, your story still matters. The kids walking past him now were different, not because they were better people, necessarily, but because a conversation that had started with cruelty had taught an entire generation to look closer, to ask questions, to remember that everyone they pass on the street is carrying something heavier than they know. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Sometimes the heroes don't look like heroes at all. And sometimes a cruel joke can become something beautiful if enough people are willing to listen to the whole story. Eddie Thompson, Medal of Honor recipient, homeless veteran, survivor, teacher, all of these things and more, had found his way home after all. Not to a place, but to a purpose. To be seen, to be heard, to remind everyone who encountered him that dignity isn't something you can lose, only something others can fail to recognize. And in a world that moves too fast and sees too little, that recognition can make all the difference. So now I ask you, have you ever passed someone on the street and wondered about their story? Have you ever made assumptions about someone based on their appearance, only to learn you were completely wrong? Share your experiences in the comments. Tell us about a time when you discovered that someone you'd overlooked was carrying more than you ever imagined. Because here at the Untold Stories, we believe that everyone deserves to be seen, everyone deserves to be heard, and everyone's story matters. Subscribe to help us keep sharing these stories that honor the forgotten. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a tale that could change how you see the world. And next time you see someone sitting alone on a street corner, remember Eddie Thompson. Remember that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear worn jackets and weathered faces and carry their medals not on their chests, but in their hearts. Everyone has a story. Everyone deserves dignity. Everyone matters. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.